This is the Content Strategy Insights podcast, episode number 157. The field of information architecture has seen a lot of change over the past 25 years. One aspect of this evolution has been a reduced prevalence of the role of information architect. IA work is still being done, but often by folks who don't have the term in their job description. Abby Covert sees this situation as both a sign of progress and as an opportunity to more deliberately democratize the craft of information architecture.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 157 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I am super delighted today to have with us Abby Covert. Abby is a well-known information architect who focuses these days on writing and teaching. Welcome, Abby. Tell the folks a little bit more about what you're up to these days.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me. Let's see. These days, I'm really focusing on democratizing information architecture. I really want to bring the information architecture lessons I've learned over the last 20 years to as many people in as many industries as possible. So I've been focusing for the last few years on projects that really work on that. The first was I expanded my authorship into my second book, which was about diagramming. It's called Stuck, Diagrams Help. And then around the same time, I also launched something called the Sense Makers Club, which is a place for people to learn how to make more sense. So I'm working on expanding that into a series of community events. We have some monthly things, some quarterly things. And then, of course, our annual celebration, Make Sense Myths, which comes up every November. So yeah, I'm keeping myself busy in the indie content world over here, Larry.
Nice. Yeah, no idle hands there, I can tell. Yeah, and I got to say, we're 1,000% aligned on the democratization thing. Anybody who's listened to this podcast knows that I've used that word in the intro to every episode. So
Yeah.
I'm super excited to talk about that. But, one thing I want to do first, because this is entitled Content Strategy Insights, is talk a little bit about your take on the relationship between information architecture and content strategy.
I love that question. It's also one of the most common questions I get. I would say my favorite quote about this is actually from Karen McGrain, who I know you've had on the pod. Karen, years ago, and I have no idea the provenance, said something to the effect of, information architecture builds the car and content strategy makes sure you don't run out of gas. And I think that when I look at the projects that I've been on, whoever is doing the information architecture and the content strategy can change. They can have different roles than those two specialties, but ultimately you do need both of those parts. You need somebody who is figuring out how the pieces arrange themselves as a whole to make sense. And then you also need someone to figure out how that whole is going to evolve and be filled with content that makes sense over time. And the degree to which you need content strategy really comes down to cadence. Are you designing something that's super evergreen and locked down, or are you designing something that changes all the time? If it's the former, you can kind of take care of the content strategy part up front. If it's the latter, it requires kind of an ongoing maintenance that you don't see as much of a need for in terms of the information architecture part.
Yeah, interesting. I love that take on that. And I had not heard that quote from Karen before. That's she's kind of a quote machine, so that's I'm not surprised she said something that brilliant. Well, hey, I want to turn to quickly to democratization, because that's like a topic near and dear to my heart. And we talked a month or two ago, kind of to prepare for this, and you said a few things in there. One of the things you said when we talked was that the current dearth of IA talent out there in the world, or of like current apparent dearth of IA talent, might be a positive sign. It might be a sign of some kind of success. Is that? Tell me more about what you were meant by that.
I think that it really comes down to labels, which is funny for an information architect to say. It comes down to labels. But I think that that's really true. Like, I think there's a lot of people that end up in my inbox that tell me that they've been practicing information architecture for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years that did not know the word for it. Now, does that make them any less good at information architecture? I would argue no, but it does limit their ability to connect with the community to get better at it. And it does limit their ability to have the right words to break into that next level of it. So I see a lot of folks that get into the labeling part and they're like, whoa, I have a label for this. And then they want a job doing that by that label. And often I have to then burst the bubble. that's actually probably not going to happen, that you're going to do information architecture, but you're going to do it in service of another role. So my most recent bout of that was moving into a role in product management. I had an IA job at Etsy that was going really well for a few years, but ultimately, because I was a person who was the only person with that title, it wasn't something that was sustainable in a corporate environment. It just was always going to be kind of a specialist contractor-like thing floating through the orb. But taking on a role of product manager, I could do a lot of the things that as an information architect, I could talk about all day, but I couldn't get them done. So I think there's something that I really learned in that process of letting go of the label as a title and thinking about it as a practice, which I think if in the 15 years that I've been teaching information architecture, that's been my focus of like, it doesn't matter what your title is, everybody needs to make more sense. And information architecture is something that existed far before we had words for it. So, we all do it all day.
The way you set that out is super interesting because it almost sounds like there's like that it's been elevated to this, like you bring in the outside pro, the proper IA consultant, but at the same time, everybody's expected to have some basic skills around it. Is that what you're saying? Because I hear a lot of like consternation in the IA world about like, and a lot in the UX world, which I run in more, about the sort of the disappearance of the role. But it sounds like you're saying that the activities are still there. We're just, they're sort of hidden away, or not hidden away, but like just not articulated.
Yeah, I think that the activities are absolutely getting done. I mean, people are labeling things and they're picking structures to put content into. Like that is absolutely happening all day, every day in the majority of knowledge worker jobs, if not in the majority of tech and design jobs. So everyone is doing it all day. Now, when do you need a specialist? I think is the more interesting question. Like, what is the point at which you need it? And to be honest with you, I think the point is fear. I think that there is a fear point. There is a risk assessment point where the fear is great enough that an organization feels the need to bring in an expert. Either that expert is in the scale of the problem, or that expert is in the tool of the problem or the medium of the problem. But whatever it is, there is a moment where just the mess is too big. You've let it get too big. It's just too big. And often that's where you see the need to invest in somebody from the outside. I'm constantly told by students now that when outsiders come in, companies listen. But when they say it, companies don't listen. And I understand that. I understand exactly why that happens. They are resting on the laurels of you as a resource. They're like, yeah, we'll get to that. Versus, oh no, this thing is broken right now. We need to fix it right now. Get the person that will fix this right now. And those are different conversations fundamentally. And it's all about incentive, like they're incentivized to change. One of the best examples I have of this from my consulting days was there was a startup that merged with two other startups, and they were going along on their merry way with their 3 startup, weird morph object product that they had morphed into. It was not until they needed to translate that product outside of English that they realized that they had a problem, because they had so many verb duplicates, noun duplicates, just inconsistency everywhere. And it's fine when you have 14 ways of saying something in English until you have to find 14 ways to say that in Spanish. And all of a sudden it breaks down. That's incentive though. They had an incentive to go into a market that required them to translate. Their incentive was not to clean up the mess. It wasn't just like, oh my God, that's such a mess, we should clean it up. Like, unfortunately, humans just don't work that way. We don't clean things just because we wanna, but we dream about it.
Yeah. No, and the way you say that, it makes me realize that like the information about information architecture is dispersed well enough that it puts the fear of God in people when they get to a certain point. They know like, oh my God, we need help figuring out this mess. So there's some level of awareness about it, but and also the way you describe that relationship, because that's a common thing in any kind of consulting, is that a consultant can come in and say the same thing that the practitioners have been saying for 5 years, and the boss will finally start paying attention. Those are interesting dynamics.
But it's not just paying attention. I want to make sure that that's really clear.
Yeah.
It's not just that they're paying attention. It is that they are changing the incentive structure to make that thing matter now. The incentive structure did not make that thing matter before. Now it matters. It's not that I matter more. It's that thing that they brought me in for to fix, that thing matters more. The problem matters more. And I think people miss that. They kind of, I feel really bad when students bring this to me because there's a lot of shame with it. Like that they're not good enough, that they couldn't make that sale. And that's not the case most of the time. Most of the time that sale was impossible until the moment where something was large enough that it needed to be fixed. And that's an incentive change.
Got it. So that gets into like the I think a lot of practitioners not struggle, but deal with the ongoing issues day to day of like sort of authority and sort of permission or being assigned responsibilities to do stuff. And it sounds like I don't know, all these dynamics you're talking about. Have you, and I want to quickly acknowledge too, that you've done a ton of leadership work in the information architecture field, organizing conferences. You started World IA Day. You've done a ton in this world. Did you do any explicit kind of democratization work in any of those roles? Was there like outreach?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the first democratization work that I did around IA was probably in preparation for Interaction 2012. I was invited as an information architect to speak at that conference. And they invited me under the proposal to talk about information architecture heuristics. And that was a big ask. I mean, to stand in front of a design group and talk about IA in 2012 took a lot of courage, I would say. And yeah, I feel like that was really the first time that I was saying out loud, like, look, all the things that we're doing in information architecture are super useful. If you guys just drop all of the pseudo academic crap that's around it, a lot of people could get a lot of use out of this thing. And so that was kind of the first foray into that for me. And I would say that the reaction that I got from other people in the industry was the reason that I kept doing that, both information architects and non, of just people saying like, wow, I thought this was like a lot more complicated. And I think that like words are tricky like that. Like information architecture happens to have two beautifully complex words kind of married together. And when people hear them, the first reaction that I've always gotten 20 years as an information architect, wow, like, oh, it's always like a whoo, but they don't necessarily know what that means. And so I think that that's a really interesting part of it, is like for a job whose job it is to clarify terms and structures for terms, the term for us is incredibly fraught and has been used at all sorts of levels and is even argued whether or not it exists, So yeah. We could get, it depends on how philosophical you want to get, Larry.
No, and the same thing with content strategy. I think the cruel irony of the word people being unable to correctly identify themselves in their roles. But it seems like
go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I feel like a lot of that comes down to like how slow systems are to change. Like I remember when information architect rather, was the role, right? The role du jour, the hot role, the one that all the recruiters wanted to get in your phone number for. When that was happening, there was a totally different structure that role sat beneath. And it was like something like business analyst or like web designer or like webmaster, you know what I mean? And it took some corporations a decade to get rid of those names for those things and adopt information architect. And you know what happened? In that decade, everybody decided to change it to UX. And now they're still called information architects, and they've been lobbying with their management to get it changed for the last 10 years because it's out of date. This happens in academics. This happens in corporate structures. This just happens. So I think that it's interesting when a field is trying to establish itself at the same time as become an integral part of a capitalist machine. Like we have to define ourselves very quickly to show the value, but the ways that we're defining ourselves are pigeonholing us into a particular system at a particular time. And ultimately, systems kick back. So, we want to be the word people that have great labels, and we're the word people that have terrible labels, cobbler's children and all that.
No, and as you're saying that, I'm picturing like Stuart Brand's pace layers.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden wondering about like, especially the geological metaphor that he uses of like the deeper you go, the slower things change. And I'm flipping it around now, not as like a model for change, but like, how do ideas get in there that makes them hard to change subsequently?
Yeah.
Do you think we could be better? Because that seems like an important democratization tool to have, to be able to hack that.
I think that one of the things that I've shifted focus on is I no longer am interested in teaching corporations about information architecture. I am now interested in teaching individual people about information architecture. So I think that that's how it ultimately gets done. I think that like the goal from my standpoint is to have people feeling more confident making information architecture decisions while knowing that that is what they're doing. And you don't actually need to know the term information architecture to do that. And I'm fine with that. Like if all they ever figure out about practicing IA is that like having clear labels is important so that people know how to use your thing, I am set. That's great. But if they hit a place where they have a mess that's big enough, I also want them to have a word that they can ask for from other people, that they can search for on the Google or the Chat GPT or whatever the heck they're going to use. Like I want them to have that vocabulary, because I know how much it hurts when people don't have that vocabulary, that like pain with no name, that I think, everybody suffered from for a real long time in terms of information architecture. And some people still do.
And that seems like sort of a, back to the pace layers, like a fairly superficial level of democratization, just being able to articulate the right label to get the help you need in the moment.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to picture how to go deeper, like how, like, and you've obviously had some success at this, but how you establish in like an individual or an institution that sort of awareness that like, I'm just doing this thing. I'm labeling stuff. I'm organizing stuff. I'm sorting out messes. Some people call this information architecture, and I know to call it that when I need help. But well, I guess let me flip that around a little bit. Like, what are people calling it as they do it now? Like you said, UX a minute ago. Is that the main label, do you think, or are there others?
It depends. There's folks that are coming from the design and tech place, and they're absolutely calling it UX, or they're calling it content design, content strategy. I've heard product design. I've heard that as absolutely like that's just product design. But I also heard that about interaction design 10, 15 years ago. So, I'm kind of used to that one. The one that's more interesting to me is the people that are coming from outside of design and tech that are doing this in service of small businesses or charitable causes, people that are ending up finding specifically my stuff. And like, I have to tell them that I didn't invent this. I have to be like very clear, like I didn't invent information architecture. Like this is a larger thing, because they only want the everyday approach. They just want to fix the thing that's broken right now. And I think that that's something we could learn for businesses too, back to the incentive point. Like there's no point in making a big, frilly, frothy presentation about all of the things that are wrong at your organization if that's not what was asked for, right? And we do that all the time in this industry. And I think that like the whole, they should trust me because I'm an expert. I think that that's something that it took me years to understand the implications of ego in that. And that like, really, if we're believing what we say about information architecture, about content strategy, about user experience, it is about a contextual set of decisions within a set of circumstances every single time. You can't be an expert in that. You can be an expert in the process. You can be an expert in communicating the process. You can be an expert in making screens that stem from that process. But the idea that you would always know the answer and that your opinion is always gold, I think that's a really dangerous thing that I see a lot in our industry. And I see democratization kind of be harnessed with but you need experts. You wouldn't want to have, what is the best one? You want to have surgery from a surgeon that didn't go to medical school. And I'm like, we are not doing surgery most of the time. So I'm cool with not being trained as a content strategist and doing content strategy. I'm cool with most of information architecture work being done by people that don't even know the name of it. I'm totally cool with that.
As you say that now, I want to, it's like a consumer of democratization now. I want like a chart that shows like, surgery, no. Information architecture, yes. Like what else is on that? Well,
here's the thing though, and I want to be really clear. It's not information architecture, full boat all the time, don't need an expert, right? Like I'll give you a good example. Let's say that we are designing an app that could kill us, right? Like an actual app that like, I don't know, like launches something or, calculates something or communicates something of dire importance. In a situation like that, I would sure as heck hope that the project team that is in charge of that would understand the need for an increased level of expertise in all of those fields, right? All of the ones that we talk about democratizing, the content strategy, the information architecture, the research, all of it. I hope to goodness that they all have budget for, time for, and respect for, and thoughtfulness for those things, right? But that's because they're working on an app that could kill us. You know what I mean? When you're working on an e-commerce website, is that an app that could kill us? No. There are parts, though, that I really wish that there were more expertise introduced, right? Like think about the ethical quandaries that algorithms have brought to the way that content is brought into information structures online. There's so many things that are being done because people don't even know that they're making ethical considerations when they're building their algorithms or making the proposal to the developer to do so. Those are the moments where I'm like, those are the companies that do need expertise, right? Like a small e-commerce company with 20 products that has a graphic designer who they hire to do their brand and their website. They don't need an information architect. They need that graphic designer to know how to make a simple website that's going to show 20 products that people are not going to be confused by. And hopefully they have some analytics so they know if it worked and they can tweak it over time. That's what they need, right? They don't need to pay tens of thousands of dollars to go and have professional research done, right? There's a point where that company might grow to a place where they might need to invest in those things. But I think that like the spectrum of when we introduce these specialties and who can do them, it's so variable. I feel like that's why democratization is important. It's because everybody needs to know about it so they know how much of it they need and when they need an expert.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, now I'm picturing like I want your next book now to be about about democratization. About like because the way you're saying that, like you said, a couple things you said, like that that kind of awareness of the thresholds around it, what it can, like what any one trade or craft consists of, and then being able to identify, it's kind of like that, the not the frog in the pot, but like when you're swimming in the water, you kind of have to step out and look back in and figure out, why you knew what to do in the moment. How, I guess, and I love how meta a lot of this conversation is getting. I guess, can you go meta on that and talk about how to be aware, like cultivating awareness of both your consumption and production of democratization, if that makes sense?
Like within information architecture, or just
like
within
any craft, like information architecture or content strategy, any craft, just like being aware of like you're clear in your mind about like what you do and what your colleagues do, and you want to advance democratization in some new population or something. How do you start that?
Oh, it is about education. And that's really why I'm in the place I'm in now, with wanting to focus on that as my full-time gig. I feel like when I give students advice on how to manage change within their organizations, the part that slows them down is usually what they need, which is me saying, you jumped right into the change and you're trying to change them with a set of tools and mediums that they don't yet understand. And that's going to be a problem. So you have to do a level of education and democratization of the knowledge of the skill set. And also there's an aspect of bringing people along in the work. I mean, I think with diagrams, I kind of have like the perfect example, which is we have all been in a meeting where somebody pulls up a big old, diagram that doesn't make any sense. Is that a typed scale that no one could consume. And everybody knows that the reason that diagram is on screen is for the person who made it to be like, look at all the things I made. Like, it's not about making a decision. It's not about understanding something. It's just about like, wow, you made a thing, right? If we look at the things that we make with our colleagues as the users in mind, then we can make those moments really meaningful. We can say like, look at this big map I made. You don't need to understand this whole thing, but here's the next slide. 3 things that I actually learned from making this map I want you to know about. That's a much more effective way than like beating our deliverables over the heads of people outside of our functions all day long and hoping that they're going to read them or let us walk them through it in a meeting or comment on our Google Doc or whatever it is. In reality, people want to know what you are incentivized by. They want to know if you understand what they're incentivized by, and they want to make sure that those incentives are not at odds and that both incentives are met by whatever is produced. If that's not the case, there's going to be a problem with the people part. And then the information architecture just doesn't matter at that point. You're not going to get anything changed. So education is the key. You need to tell people the words for the thing that they're already doing. You need to make sure that the incentive structure of your organization or of the teams in your org are not so adverse to that skill set that it's not useful, which, you could see that a lot when you see organizations like, I don't know, prioritizing conversion rate over everything. And that's an excuse for like unclear labels or anti-patterns and things like that. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like there's an education piece of like, this is a thing. This is a thing we all do. This is a thing that you already do. This is a thing we are doing together. This is the thing I have a little bit more of experience in. And then this is how this applies to the project. But like everybody wants to jump all the way to the project. They want to go, here's the project. And through the project, I'm going to teach you about information architecture. Doesn't ever work because everybody's suspicious of the thing the whole way through. They're waiting for the big moment. They're waiting for maybe this is the time they show us a website. Nope, just a spreadsheet. Maybe this is the time they show us a website. Nope, just a diagram. Maybe, no, just a PowerPoint, like show them what it's going to be and then take them through that. We go through this beautiful process of not knowing to knowing, and then we hide the whole thing from everybody. We're like, I know at the end, and it's so much more valuable if they come with us.
Yeah, that's one of those things with design is everybody goes, oh, that's beautiful. I could have done that. It's like, actually, there was a lot that happened there. And
well, but that's the thing. And then we expect everybody to be like, oh, well, actually, there was a lot that happened there. Like, no, they're going to be like, that's so easy. I could have done that. I could have drawn that boxes and arrows map in 2 minutes in Visio or whatever they're using, So yeah.
Hey, I want to circle back. You mentioned a couple times incentives, and it sounds like I'm inferring from what you've said that the main role of the information architect is to understand the incentives in an organization and how it applies to the mess they're trying to solve.
Yes.
But do you ever have influence over incentives? Like, do you ever get, as an information architect, do you ever see opportunities to affect that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, all the time, because usually the incentives are not as, they have not been directly correlated to or causally linked to what I'm being asked to change. Like in a lot of cases, you'll see that the incentive structure of the design team is, something akin to altruism for users. Whereas, they're measuring it with like NPS or something like that, right? But then you have product who's measuring everything by conversion rate. Like if those two things are happening at the same time, like I'm just here to tell you guys right now, if anybody's watching this, like that's never going to work. You have to get those people to work together. Otherwise, it's always going to feel like sandpaper. So yeah, I have impact on incentive structures when they are misaligned across an organization in a way that impacts the work that I do. Yeah.
And again, I know you're not consulting anymore, but that seems like the kind of place that a consultant often comes in and goes, wait a minute, they're saying that over here and this over here. Yeah. How do you reconcile those? That's sort of how it manifests?
Yeah. And I think like back to the, like, when do you know you need an expert? It's about fear. Like, if you're brave enough, a lot of people can do that inside the organization too. It's just about going slow enough and making the relationships and waiting for the incentive shift in the winds to strike. Like I had a metadata wish list at Etsy, and it was just about finding product managers that wanted to do stuff and, hacking away at it over time. But the idea that I would have a meeting and have them all come together and here's all the metadata changes. Like I tried that. I'm not different than anybody else out there that's tried that, and it didn't work. Headline, it didn't work. But the slower part does work, even if you're in-house, but it's so slow. It's so slow that most of us, I don't think, could take it,
No, I'm kind of a weird metadata strategy evangelist, and that's just going nowhere fast. You just have to do it. Like you just said, it's got to be tied to something. And
you got to do the education. I had I did a little keynote at an orientation for a school I used to teach at in New York at SVA last week or the week before. And I taught all the design students about metadata without telling them that I was teaching them metadata. And then I had like a big reveal, like baby's first metadata schema, because they totally made one and they didn't even know that they were making it. But if I have to crush the dreams of one more product designer about what they can't do with data, I won't be able to take it. So I have to start younger and in different genres of the work to make sure that everybody is advocating for the metadata and not just us.
Nice. Yeah. Hey, Abby, I can't believe it. We're coming up close to time already. But I
could talk to you all day.
I know, totally. We could, and I've successfully kept us out of rabbit holes. Kind of, sometimes I wonder, someday I'll do a 3-hour interview and just go down the whole rabbit hole. But is there anything, before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to share with the folks or that's come up in the conversation that you want to circle back to?
I mean, I always take the opportunity to plug what I'm working on right now. I have a couple of really cool social activities that are attached to educational products that I've worked on. So I have the Practitioner's Guide to How to Make Sense of Any Mess, which has a monthly office hours with me answering questions from students. We're about 8 months into that program, and it is legitimately the favorite hour of my month. It's just so fun and nerdy. So if you're looking for something like that, the sensemakersclub.com has access to that. I also just launched a product called How to Diagram, and it is the video e-course version of my book about diagrams. And that comes with access to a diagram critique bingo game that I will be hosting quarterly. So yeah, I think that one's really fun. And then most recently, the Teacher's Guide to How to Make Sense of Any Mess is also now live, and I'm starting a little support group for teachers. So teachers who make sense will be starting in September. And yeah, looking for invites from teachers from all over the place, and hopefully we'll get some really good cross learning.
Oh, nice. So are you getting like classroom adopt? Because that typically comes with adoption and courses. Is that where that teacher's guide came from? Or
The teacher's guide is like a ask that I've had for years about like, how do I get this content into the hands of my students without having to have them read the entire book? Because it is not a book you would use to teach an information architecture course. It is a book that has useful content about information architecture that lots of other courses could use. So the teacher's guide was my attempt to make every single chapter kind of a self-contained lesson that the teacher could assign as a reading for their students, but also gives them kind of the background on what I've learned about teaching that particular content. And it comes with slides and assignment ideas and conversation prompts and all sorts of neat stuff. Honestly, it's the coolest thing I've ever made. I'm very
that
proud
sounds
of it.
great. I'll link to all of those in the show notes as well. Oh, hey, one very last thing, Abby. What's the best way for folks to stay in touch with you if they want to connect online?
Yeah, definitely email. I take personal emails. I do answer all of them. I also have an office hours one-on-one pro bono. I give away a couple of half hours a month, so you can join the wait list for that if you want to nerd out over video chat. And then I have an email list. So I send out only one email per month. And it is always about what I'm interested in or what I'm up to. So I would love it if people join that. You can get pretty much everything about me at abbycovert.com or thesensemakersclub.com.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Abby. This was super fun. I really enjoyed the conversation.
This was very fun and very nerdy. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.